Good afternoon, everyone. So, Harayim Tovim, thank you for joining me for Shabbat Chaverim. And beautiful day, and I'm so grateful that you're here with me. So, what I wanted to do today was kind of get us ready for Shavuot, which is coming up in just a few days. And I think that there are some really interesting things about this holiday, many of which you know, and some of which you may not. A number of things that, frankly, I learned while I was preparing for this. So I thought maybe this would be of interest to you. It's a holiday that comes usually at the very end of May, beginning of June. And the Hebrew date on which it falls is the 5th of the month of Nisan. So today, Saturday, is actually the 29th of ER, and tomorrow, Sunday, is the 1st of the month of Nisan. Excuse me, the month of Sivan. And so the holiday is on the 5th. So we're coming up upon it, and you may, I call it Shavuot, which is the Hebrew pronunciation. You may call it Shavuos because that's what you grew up with. It's the Yiddish pronunciation, but I thought that I'd share some interesting information with you. And by all means, if you have questions after we're done today, I welcome you to get in touch with me either by calling me, sending me an email, a text, whatever works best for you so that I can help answer your questions. Okay, so first and foremost, the meaning of the word. As I said, it can be pronounced Shavuos, which is the Yiddish Ashkenazi usage, or Shavuot. The word Shavua means week. When we wish each other a Shavua Tov after Shabbat, we're wishing each other to have a good upcoming week. Shavuot is the plural, meaning weeks. So the festival is also called the Feast of Weeks, and it's called Pentecost in the Christian tradition. It's the Jewish holiday that, as I mentioned, occurs on the 6th day of the Hebrew month of Sivan. And so it usually falls anytime between May 15th and June 14th. Within that period of time, depending upon, of course, the Hebrew calendar. So it's a holiday with a double significance. First and foremost, it is a pilgrimage festival that represents one of the harvests. So we have, since the day after Passover, been engaged in something known as the counting of the Omer. Every day we count one number higher until we get to the number 49. Why 49? Because there were exactly 7 weeks, 49 days between the day when we left Egypt after having been redeemed from slavery until the day that we reached the foot of Mount Sinai for the acceptance, for receiving the Torah. So those 49 days are a critical period of time. And as I mentioned at services this morning, it's not something we just count willy-nilly. It's a very exacting way of counting. And it is a time during which we are supposed to be cognizant of the journey. This journey that took us 7 weeks. And while we were journeying, we were growing up as a people, starting to. We're just about in our toddlerhood right now. We're not quite an adult nation yet. So much to learn, so many new laws, this new God by the name of Yahweh that we are following, Moses and Aaron are leaders who we are following, and so on. So we have this pilgrimage festival that is marked by the wheat harvest. 49 days, we are bringing in the Omer, which is the barley harvest, at the end of which we begin to collect the wheat. And if you think about the seasons, not here in the United States, but based upon ancient Israel, which was, of course, an agricultural society, everything revolved around agriculture and making sure that the crops came in and that food would be plentiful. Because if you didn't have the right meteorological conditions during the right seasons, there were famines. And as we know from reading the Torah, famines is what often got the Israelites into trouble. They had to leave their own land, they had to go to another land. That's how they ended up in Egypt from the land of Canaan, because there was a famine where they were, and so on. So there's a very strong influence of agriculture on all of ancient Israelite history, including the 3 pilgrimage festivals. Now, the 2 other pilgrimage festivals, and I'll explain in a moment what happens during those, are Sukkot and Pesach. Pesach is actually the first one of the year because it falls in the month of Nisan, which is the first month of the Hebrew calendar. The second month of the Hebrew calendar is known as Iyar. That's the month that we're in right now. And we're about to go into the third month of the Hebrew calendar, known as Sivan. So Pesach is the first of the pilgrimage festivals, followed by Shavuot, followed by Sukkot. You might not think about it in that order because we're used to calling the fall holidays the beginning of the new year. And in actuality, they fall in much later months during the year. Passover is the first month of the Hebrew year. So what happens on these pilgrimage holidays? Well, what happened in ancient Israel was that people made a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. They came from all over Israel. They brought the first fruits of their harvests. They brought the first yearlings of their flocks and their herds and so on. And these were offered to the high priest and to God. So we have this link between Passover and Shavuot, this 7 weeks during which we were freed from enslavement. We're on our way to the foot of Mount Sinai to receive the 10 Commandments and the Torah. And so this period of time is quite significant. Now, during the time that we're counting the Omer, every day for these 49 days, there's a very formulaic way of saying what day we're on. And that is that, I won't do the Hebrew for you, but I'll do the English translation. For example, if it was day 6, we would say, today is day 6 of the counting of the Omer. But then when you start getting into weeks, you name the weeks as well. So for example, if we were on day 24, we would say today is the 24th day of the Omer, making 3 weeks and 3 days of the counting of the Omer. So it appears that there was a very strong influence of this agricultural society and this counting specifically of days that was very important so that they knew where they were on the barley harvest and then coming into the wheat harvest. Shavuot is kind of one of the less familiar Jewish holidays to secular Jews outside of Israel. But in the land of Israel, it's a very important holiday. Here in the diaspora outside of Israel, it's observed for 2 days. So we're actually going to be observing it on Friday and Saturday of next week. But in Israel, it's observed for only 1 day. Okay, so that's kind of a basic introduction to this agricultural holiday. It's technically, or it's rather textually connected in the Bible to the feast of Shavuot and these grain harvests. And we begin to see how dependent upon agriculture the Israelites are going to be once they get into the land. It is, after all, Eretz Zavat Chalav Udvash. It's a land flowing with milk and honey. So, as I mentioned, there are a variety of different names for the holiday. In the Bible, it is called Shavuot, the Festival of Weeks. We also call it Chag HaShavuot, and we do greet people with Chag Sameach, because it is a chag, a festival. It's also called the Festival of Reaping because it's the time when we begin to reap the end of the spring and the beginning of the summer harvest, and the Day of First Fruits, because this is the first time when the first fruit of the produce is given to the priests and the Levites. Remember, the priests and the Levites didn't earn an income from doing their jobs. The way they made their living, or the way they were paid, was through the tithes that they were given by the rest of the people. So they really depended upon those tithes, which were not, whatever you wanted to give. It was designated at least a 10% of your produce, a 10% of your flocks, a 10% of your herds, your sheep, your goats, and so on, were given to the priests. They were sacrificed, and then part of those animals was saved for the priest and the Levites to eat as their food. So this festival, as I mentioned, happens 49 days, which is exactly 7 weeks after Passover. And Shavuot is referred to as an Atzeret. Now, there's another holiday we know of called Shmini Atzeret. The word Atzeret means to refrain or to hold back. So Shavuot, just like Sukkot and Pesach, is considered to be a day on which there is a prohibition against doing any work. It's that kind of a holiday. So it is like Shabbat. We do not work on this holiday. And it concludes this season of Passover, and it happens on the 50th day after Passover. 7 weeks, 49 days, and then on the 50th day. So the ancient Israelites would come from all over Israel. They would bring their first fruits to the temple in Jerusalem. They would bring the 7 species, which have a significant role also in Sukkot. The 7 species being wheat, barley, grapes, pomegranates, olives, dates, and figs. Those are the 7 species, and those were the things that were brought. So the text retells the story of the Jewish people when they went into exile in Egypt and then were enslaved and oppressed, and finally the redemption by God out of slavery so that they could begin their journey. So we have many modern observances as well, and you might remember this from your childhood. I don't know. But Shavuot is unlike any other holiday because there are prescribed mitzvot that are done that are not part of some of the other traditional festivals. Certain kinds of meals that are eaten, traditional holiday observances, special prayer service, and of course the abstention from work, the requirement that we are prohibited from working. And also there are lots of minhagim, customs. So a custom is not a mitzvah. It's not something that is dictated by the Torah or by text that we must do. But some of these minhagim, some of these customs have become so customary that we think we're obligated to do them by Jewish law. So there are several of them which you may be familiar with. One is that it is traditional to decorate a synagogue sanctuary with greenery. And if you've been with me for the past 2 years, for services, you know that I always decorate the ark with beautiful flowers and with baby's breath and with some kind of other greenery, fern of some kind. And I usually love to give flowers to everybody who comes to services. And that represents this this bringing of the first fruits and the spring festival, beginning the summer festival of the harvest. This granary is done because it is said, according to a midrash, that at Mount Sinai, when the Torah was given, that Mount Sinai suddenly blossomed with flowers in anticipation of the giving of the Torah. And greenery, as you may remember, also kind of figures into the story of the baby Moses, because baby Moses was found among the bulrushes in a watertight little basket that he was floating in when he was a few months old. And later on, of course, Moses is going to be the one who brings us to Mount Sinai, which burst into blossom before the giving of the Torah. So there are all different kinds of agricultural symbols that are used as part of this holiday, and it's really quite lovely. So, in addition to the traditional Torah portion that we read, which talks about Shavuot, we also read from Nitzavim, Atem Nitzavim Hayom, you stand here this day, all of you, which talks about who was at Mount Sinai at the time that the Ten Commandments were given. So, if you answered anything other than we were all there, you would be wrong. According to Jewish tradition, we were all at Mount Sinai when the Torah was given. From the lowly water carrier to the wood chopper to the highest chieftain of the tribes of Israel, everybody was there. And we all received Torah that day. And we all accepted Torah that day. So it wasn't that, a million people gathered at the foot of Mount Sinai and 758,236 said, okay, we'll take it, and the rest said no. Now, there's a wonderful midrash, several of them actually, a story that explains how it was that the Israelites ended up receiving the Torah. One of those midrashim says that God felt that the Israelites were going to be a little bit stubborn. And so, God knows why, right? Because they've done nothing but complain so far. And so there's a midrash that says that God picked up Mount Sinai and held it up over the heads of the Israelites with the base of the mountain right over them and said, will you accept my Torah? Well, if you were to look up and see this enormous mountain being held over you with the idea that if you said no, it was going to come crashing down on you, you'd probably say yes also. So that's one of the midrashim. Another midrashim says that after God and Moses prepared the Torah, that God shopped around for a people to give it to. And first he went to the Edomites, who were the ancestors of Esau. And he said to the Edomites, do you want my Torah? Will you accept my Torah? And the Edomites said, well, what's in it for us? And God said, well, it says thou shalt not kill. And the Edomite people said, well, we are a people of war, and that's how we continue to survive, by making war on other people and taking the spoils of war. So if your Torah says you shall not kill, then we can't accept your Torah. So then God went to the Ishmaelites and said, will you accept my Torah? And the Ishmaelites said, well, what's in it for us? And God said, the Torah says thou shalt not commit adultery. And the Ishmaelites said, well, that's part of how we live our lives, so we can't accept the Torah. Then God came to the Israelites and said, will you accept my Torah? But the Israelites didn't say no. What the Israelites said was, Nishma, we will listen. They said, La'asot v'nishma, we will do and we will listen. Meaning that they were going to take the Torah sight unseen, not having heard what was in it, but they were going to accept it, and then they would listen. And because of that response, people who said, yes, we'll take it, we don't know what's in it yet, but we're sure you're going to teach us. And that was then when God decided that the Israelites would become God's Am Segula, God's treasured people. Now let me talk about that phrase for a minute. Many of you have heard, I'm sure, the phrase chosen people. And I've even had Christian friends and members of Christian clergy say to me, oh, you're Jewish. You are one of the chosen people. As if somehow chosenness necessarily means better than. The term is actually Am Segula, which means a treasured people. So God chose Israel to receive the Torah, and we are obligated and responsible for being an Or LaGoyim, a light unto the nations, which means that we have taken on Torah and we are supposed to serve as a moral exemplar to the rest of the world as to how one lives a life of goodness, integrity, love, generosity, good deeds, and so on. So being chosen doesn't necessarily mean being better. It simply means that we were chosen as a treasured people who have a specific responsibility to the rest of the world. So during Shavuot, families traditionally will decorate their homes as well as their synagogues with plants and flowers and leafy branches. As I mentioned, some synagogues decorate the bima with a canopy of flowers that actually almost represents a chuppah. And when you think about it, the giving of the Torah was like the nation of Israel, the bride, embarking in a committed marriage relationship with the bridegroom, God. So it's customary in some synagogues to actually decorate in a way that the synagogue looks like a chuppah. And that custom came initially from the Sephardi communities who actually will read out a ketubah between God and the people of Israel, just like a marriage ketubah is read at a wedding. And that was adopted at one point in time by Hasidic and Ashkenazi communities as well, particularly those from Hungary. So that was something I didn't know, was that sometimes a ketubah is read on Shavuot. And it sounds like a really beautiful custom to me. I haven't been able to find a copy of the kind of ketubah that would be read between God and the children of Israel, but I'm sure there's something that exists, and it would definitely be something nice to see. So another custom that is common during Shavuot is all-night Torah study. And there is a practice where we stay up all night. It's known as Tikkun Leil Shavuot. It has its source in the Midrash, in the stories about in the Talmud, which relates that the night before the Torah was given, the Israelites retired early. They went to bed early so that they could be well rested for the momentous day that lay ahead. But the Midrash says that they overslept and Moses had to wake them up because God was already waiting on the mountaintop. So to rectify this perceived flaw in our national character as Israelites, many religious Jews and other Jews will stay up all night and study Torah. And if you think about the kids the night before a trip, you're taking them to Disneyland or Disney World or on a cruise or whatever it might be, nobody can sleep. Everybody's so excited. And sometimes They're so excited that they stay up really late. They finally fall asleep, and then the next morning you can barely rouse them. And so the Midrash tells us that the Israelites went to sleep early, knowing they were going to have a big day the next day. And in their excitement, they went to sleep and then overslept. And Moses actually had to come in and wake them up and say, "Come on, guys, you're about to get the Torah. Let's go." So in order that we don't oversleep on Shavuot, we stay up all night studying. And this custom of staying up all night is quite old. It goes back to about 1533. Rabbi Joseph Caro, who wrote the Shulchan Aruch, who was then living in Salonika, which was Greece under the Ottoman Empire. He invited another rabbi, Shlomo Halevi Alkabetz, and other Kabbalistic colleagues to hold these all-night Shavuot study vigils, which they prepared for days in advance. And just like the Israelites had prepared for 3 days prior to Shavuot to get ready for the holiday. And during one of those study sessions, according to the legend, an angel appeared and taught them Torah. So we have all these beautiful midrashim and customs that are associated with Shavuot that we don't see associated with some of the other pilgrimage festivals like Sukkot and Pesach. Some of you may have, at some point in time, attended one of these all-night study sessions, or at least a study session that maybe started at 8 o'clock at night and went until 1 or 2 in the morning, so it wasn't quite all night long, but it was nevertheless several hours. And very often congregations, particularly in a modern context, will bring in different speakers. Maybe there's somebody that speaks from 10 to 10:30, and then 10:30 to 11, and then from 11 to midnight there is dessert and coffee, and then you study again after that. So different communities will do different things. And this year, because of the coronavirus, there are a lot of congregations that are going to be doing this Tikkun La'el Shavuot, this study overnight, via Zoom and Facebook and YouTube and all other kinds of technology and technological platforms, since people can't be together to study. So it's a wonderful custom. I've been involved in it before. You got to kind of take a nap earlier in the day so that you can make it up through the night, and people kind of come and go, and not everybody stays for the whole thing, but it's really quite lovely. So one of the other things that we do on Shavuot is we read the book of Ruth. The book of Ruth. Now, the book of Ruth is actually a Megillah. And you know that word Megillah from the book of Esther. The word Megillah simply means a scroll, a scroll. And we actually have 5 different scrolls in Judaism. Only one of them do we still read actually in scroll form, and that's the Megillat Esther that we read at Purim. But there are 4 others, and each of them is now read out of book form, out of a codex form. And one of those is the book of Ruth, which we read at Shavuot. On Tisha B'Av, which comes late July, early August, we read the book of Echa, Lamentations. At Sukkot, we read from the Megillat Kohelet, Ecclesiastes. At Passover, we read from Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, which is in one of the other parts of the Tanakh. So we have, did I name 5 scrolls? Esther, Ruth, Lamentations, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Songs. Yes, 5. Okay. So what is Ruth about, and why do we read it? Why do we read it? Well, the primary focus of this holiday is receiving the Torah. So this is an opportunity each year for Jews to reevaluate their relationship with the Torah and with Judaism. It's a enactment of the standing at Mount Sinai, because when we read the Ten Commandments, we actually do stand during that Torah portion. But it's also a recommitment, a reconfirmation of our dedication to Judaism as our one and only faith. The book of Ruth, Megillat Ruth, is read on Shavuot for a couple of reasons. One of which is that Ruth, according to Jewish custom, tradition, is considered to be the first convert to Judaism. The first person who chose Judaism, she was not born Jewish, but who chose Judaism as her faith tradition. And the story is that Ruth had a husband and 2 sons. Her husband died, her 2 sons were married, and then each of those sons died. And her 2 daughters-in-law were not going to stay where they were. They wanted to go back to their ancestral homes. So one of them left, and then the other daughter-in-law, Naomi, said that she would stay with Ruth. And Ruth said, no, we're going to go back to your land of Moab. And the very, very famous verse from the book of Ruth, your people shall be my people. Whither you go, I will go. Your people shall be my people. Your God shall be my God. And so through that statement of linking her fate and her faith with Naomi and the Jewish people, Ruth is considered the first of the official converts to Judaism. So Ruth and Naomi go back to the land of Moab, and Ruth lives there for the rest of her days. And in fact, not only is she considered the first Girot, the first convert to Judaism, but it turns out that King David is actually a descendant of Ruth. She is his great-grandmother. And King David is believed to have been born and died on Shavuot during this harvest time. And so all of these books, all of these events, there's a confluence of all of these events. When Ruth goes back to the land of Moab with Naomi, it is in the middle of the wheat harvest and so on. So her conversion to Judaism is how she enters the covenant, and it's described in this book, and that very much resonates with other themes of Shavuot. The harvest, the loving kindness, all of which are major themes of the Torah. So we read the book of Ruth. That's customary to read. It's not a long book. It's a beautiful story. She has tsuris in the beginning, but then things get a little bit better later on. And she ends up being the great-grandmother to King David. So a king of Israel and one of the Mashiach, the Messiah, is going to be a descendant of King David. So she was actually of the line that is going to eventually give rise to the Messiah. So very important that she converted to Judaism. And it's a beautiful story, and I'm going to read part of it at our service on Friday morning. Okay, what else do we do? So I want to show you a little diagram here. Not a little diagram, but a picture. So here is our wheat and our barley. We've talked about the harvest. Here is the Torah, because we are remembering, celebrating, observing the giving of Torah. And here is a piece of cheesecake. This one happens to be strawberry, maybe from Cantor's Deli in Los Angeles. I don't know. It doesn't have to be strawberry cheesecake, but it is customary to eat dairy foods, especially blintzes, at least that's an Ashkenazi tradition, on Shavuot. So why would a people who are known to have a propensity for lactose intolerance problems be eating dairy products? And the answer comes from a few different places. So, not only do we eat cheesecake, but we eat blintzes and maybe a cheese kugel or some kind of a kugel with ricotta cheese in it and cheese kreplach. And there's a whole different set of foods that the Iraqi Jews eat. They eat a dough that's buttered and with sugar. They eat a 7-layered cake that represents 7 heavens. This is in the Tunisian and the Moroccan traditions. Yemenite Jews don't eat dairy foods on Shavuot. They eat meat. So why do we eat dairy foods? There are a variety of reasons, but there's both a night meal and a day meal. And usually meat is served at night. And dairy is served either for the day meal or for a morning kiddush, something like that. So on Thursday evening of this coming week, you are going to have a festive meat meal. And then on Friday, during the day, you're going to have festive dairy meals. And I know that our culinary department is planning some special things for you. Don't groan, don't roll your eyes. I've worked with Michael and the rest of the wonderful people in the kitchen. They're going to have something really nice for you on Shavuot. Hopefully some cheesecake and maybe some other things. So at night, we're going to eat meat, and then during the day, dairy. So why dairy? Well, before we received the Torah, the Israelites were not obligated to follow the laws of the Torah because they didn't have it yet. And part of those laws, of course, were the laws surrounding food, and specifically laws of shchita, which are the laws about how an animal is slaughtered to make it kosher. So since all the meat pots that the Israelites had and all their dishes now had to be made kosher, because now that they have the Torah, they know about the laws of kashrut. So none of their meat pots were kosher anymore. So they just were kosher. So they opted to eat dairy foods. Okay. Another reason, King Solomon compared the Torah to milk. Why? Because according to tradition, King Solomon said, like honey and milk, it lies under your tongue. So the Torah is the color of milk, kind of white, creamy white color. It reminds us of milk. And who drinks milk? Who drinks milk? Some of you are probably raising your hand. Who are the primary consumers of milk? Babies and children. And so it reminds us that at the time that the Jews received the Torah and the 10 Commandments, we were like babes in the wilderness. We were still little tiny children, just trying to figure it out, how we were going to get into this promised land and how we were going to get there as a mature community of people, as opposed to just having come out of slavery, not being able to make our own decisions, rule our own people, and so on. So it reminds us of milk. It reminds us of the fact that the Israelites were still like little children drinking milk. And there's also an interesting gematria. And I've talked to you about gematria before. Gematria is Hebrew numerology. Every letter of the Hebrew alphabet has a numerical equivalent. Just like if I were to say A is 1, B is 2, C is 3, D is 4, and so on and so forth. Similarly, Aleph is 1, Bet is 2, Gimel is 3, Dalet is 4, and so on. So when we add up the numeric value of certain words, we can do all kinds of fanciful, fun things with that. According to the Zohar, which is the Kabbalistic text, Each day of the year, there are 365 days of the year. Each day of the year corresponds to one of the Torah's 365 negative commandments. So the Torah has 613 commandments, 365 of which say, thou shalt not, and 248 of which say, thou shalt. Okay? So each day, it's easy to remember because there's 365 days in a year. Each one of those, according to the Zohar, is linked to one of the negative commandments. But Shavuot, the gematria of the word chalav, milk, if you add up the letters chet, lamed, and bet, you come up with the number 40. The number 40. And it corresponds to the 40 days and 40 nights that Moses spent on Mount Sinai before he brought the Torah down. So there are all these other things, the number of negative commandments, the letters of the word chalav, which means milk. All of this kind of mystically also brings us into the holiday. And one of the negative commandments in the Torah, and we talked about these 365 negative commandments associated with 365 days of the year, tells us, bring the first fruits of your land to the house of God, your Lord. So we're told that we're supposed to bring the first fruits of our produce. And then it says, do not cook a kid in its mother's milk. And we read that in Exodus. So we know that we are being told that milk is associated with this holiday of bringing first fruits. So there's lots and lots of ways in which the rabbis connected the sacred text of the Torah with some of the texts that were written later, like the Zohar, the Shulchan Aruch, and so on. But I think it's fascinating how all these different pieces are brought in to give greater meaning to the holiday and to explain why it is customary for us to eat these dairy foods on the holiday. Okay, so there are a couple of other customs that are associated with Shavuot, some of which you may be very familiar with. And one of those is confirmation. Confirmation, which was most often practiced in Reform communities, and then, of course, in conservative communities as well, is an opportunity for a young person, usually somewhere between 16 and 18, to reconfirm their dedication to Judaism and their acceptance of Judaism as their one and only faith. And of course, one of the reasons why we have confirmation on Shavuot is because of the story of Ruth, the fact that we received the 10 Commandments. So what better day to do it than on Shavuot? Now, depends on what day of the week it falls, but many congregations will have confirmation on Shavuot itself. Usually you see young people dressed in a white robe to mimic the issue of, that the Torah is white, that it is a day of purity on which they are reconnecting to their Judaism, but doing so as an adult who can make that kind of a decision. Because even though a 13-year-old is considered to be an adult, according to Jewish law, confirmation, because it takes place later, allows for that young person to develop a little more of a sense of maturity and understanding of what they're doing. And so that was in the 19th century when confirmation started becoming more prevalent. And today in Reform synagogues in North America, typically they will hold these Shavuot or these ceremonies for kids between the ages of 16 and 18. Many, many congregations are moving it to the later end of that spectrum because for one very important reason, and that is that it keeps kids hooked into religious school for another couple of years after their bar bat mitzvah. And it's usually a graduation ceremony along with a confirmation ceremony, really quite beautiful. Usually the class will stand in front of an open ark, recalling the Israelites standing at Mount Sinai for the giving of the Torah. In the congregations in which I've been involved, both as a rabbi and a congregant, and as a kid who was confirmed, very often there is a private blessing from the rabbi that could go on for several minutes, and something which confirmation kids really look forward to, because it's the first time that the rabbi really addresses the young person as a young adult and not just as a kid anymore. So confirmation is customary also on Shavuot, and many of you, I'm sure, have either been confirmed yourselves or been to the confirmation ceremonies of your children, your grandchildren, maybe even a great-grandchild, and they really are quite lovely. So the date of the holiday is in a little bit of dispute, and the reason for that is because the Torah doesn't exactly specify the actual date on which Shavuot falls. So it is subject to a few different interpretations of the date, and both in traditional and non-traditional circles, sometimes that date varies. And these discussions really center around two different ways of looking at Shavuot. One is the day on which it actually occurs, the day on which the Torah was given to Moses, and the other is the day on which it occurs in relationship to the counting of the Omer. So meaning the 50th day from the first day of counting. So there is some dispute about this, and since I was there, as were all of you, for the giving of the Torah, I should know what the date is, but I don't, because it was a very long time ago and I don't remember. But according to a classical timeline, the Israelites arrived at the wilderness of Sinai on a new moon. Okay? So a new moon means Rosh Chodesh, no moon in the sky, right? Maybe just a little tiny sliver, but pretty dark. That is a new moon. And the 10 Commandments were given on the following Shabbat. So the question of whether the new moon fell on a Sunday or a Monday is undecided, and there's a whole discussion about it in Tractate Shabbat in the Talmud. But in practice, Shavuot is observed on the 6th day of the month of Sivan in Israel. And so that is our custom here as well. So we count the Omer 49 days from the second day of Pesach. On the 50th day, that falls on Shavuot, which is the 6th of Nisan. And there are differing ideas as to what Shabbat means. Some people believe that, or there were Talmudic sages and the Karaites, and they all differed in what the word Shabbat meant, because the Torah says that the counting of the Omer begins on the first Shabbat following Pesach. Now, Shabbat is an interesting word because it doesn't always mean Saturday Shabbat. Shavuot, this festival, this Chag, is also considered a Shabbat, even though it may not fall on a Saturday. And all that means is that it is a day of rest on which you are prohibited from working. So Shabbat doesn't only mean from Friday night to Saturday night. Shabbat also means a day, an atzeret, a work stoppage, and a day on which work is prohibited. So if you look at Pesach, there are 2 days. There's the first day of Pesach and the second day of Pesach. And they are both considered to be Shabbat because they are both full rest days. So if the Torah says on the second day of, on the Shabbat, Are they talking about the second day of Passover on which you have to rest? Or are they talking about the actual Shabbat that comes after Passover? I know, it's very confusing. The Hebrew calendar is a very elaborate, intense um, uh, document that could take years and years and years of study to understand. And I am little by little getting more and more information. But so we don't really know the exact date of this holiday, but we follow here in the diaspora outside of Israel what they do in Israel, and we do observe it on the 6th of the month of of Sivan, which is this coming Friday. So we begin Thursday night, Friday, and then we go right into Shabbat. So we get nice meals all weekend long. I hope you're looking forward to that. Let me see if there's anything else I can tell you about this amazing holiday. Other than dairy foods and greens and special liturgy and staying up all night to study, and the fact that the days are in dispute. I mean, of course the days are in dispute. We're Jews. We dispute everything. We're going to finish the counting of the Omer. And so I hope that you will join me for blessings this coming Thursday night. Those will be at 4:45 at the same time we do Shabbat blessings, 4:45 Thursday evening. Friday morning, I'll be leading a festival service. You do not have the books for this, but many of the prayers are just like the prayers we do on Shabbat. There are a couple of insertions for the specific holiday, which I'll be reading. We will do Hallel. There is a special Torah reading for that day, and I'm going to read you a little bit of the book of Ruth. And then on Friday night, we have Shabbat blessings at 4:45, and Saturday morning, Shabbat services. So a week from today, Shabbat services at 10 a.m. Next week, there is no Shabbat Chaverim, but we are going to have a Havdalah service next Saturday night at 6 o'clock. And I hope you will join me for that. And it's kind of, for me and for many rabbis, in normal years, kind of an important and significant Havdalah service, because Shavuot is the last of the major holidays until we get to Rosh Hashanah. And so we have what's usually a few months respite where rabbis go to camp, rabbis go to Israel and study for a month or 6 weeks. We have our vacations. We have family reunions. We go camping. We do what other people do. We're still working, obviously, but we do also enjoy a time without religious school and a time without some of the other daily, weekly, and monthly obligations that we have. This year, things are going to be different. Camps, sadly, are closed. Most of the Jewish camps, in fact, I believe all of the Jewish camps, in particular the overnight camps, have decided that they are not going to run their summer seasons, which is an enormous disappointment for kids, for faculty, for the staff, for the college kids and high school kids who come as counselors in training and counselors and unit heads and so on. And, so many Jewish kids look forward to their camp experience. And it's such a crucial experience in the life of a Jewish child to meet Jewish friends, and in a context of living and learning Judaism, to also be having a fabulous time. To be able to call the waterfront by its Hebrew name and the pool by its Hebrew name and the dining hall by its Hebrew name, and so on and so forth. So it's a rough time for a lot of kids, thousands of kids who usually go to Jewish summer camps. Equally as sad is that it is a time of great financial loss for a lot of our Jewish movements who rely on the tuition for camp to help with their annual finances. So it's difficult all around, but they definitely made the right decision in that there just is no way to have a true sleepaway summer camp experience given the current situation and the way in which they would have to keep the kids apart and do so many things to ensure the safety of the children as well as all of the adult staff. So if you're looking for a wonderful place to make a donation, find your favorite Jewish camp and write a check there. And they would be most appreciative. So we have a very busy week coming up. Next Saturday night, when I do Havdalah with you, we're all going to kind of breathe a sigh of relief that we've gotten through this entire cycle from Slichot before Rosh Hashanah through Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Shmini Atzeret, Simchat Torah, into Hanukkah, and then what do we have? Tisha B'Av, or Tu B'Shvat, and then Purim, and then Pesach, into, what am I forgetting? Anything? Pesach into all these spring holidays in Israel. Yom HaShoah, Yom HaZikaron, Yom HaAtzmaut, Yom Yerushalayim. Today is Jerusalem Day. And so, or actually yesterday was Jerusalem Day. Sorry about that. And then, of course, into Shavuot. That ends this very long, very intense annual cycle of holidays. We do have Tisha B'Av during the summer, late July, early August, where we recall the calamitous events that the Jewish people were victim to. And then we wait again for Slichot right before Rosh Hashanah. And then it's the cycle all over again. So I am inviting you to join me on that cycle, to participate in as much or as little, but hopefully as much as you would like to. We say a blessing in our services for our teachers and our students and the students of our students. And although I may be the one facilitating and leading a lot of these class sessions, I feel like I am learning a tremendous amount in doing this. So I want to wish you all Shabbat Shalom. When evening comes, I'm wishing you all a Shavua Tov, a good week. And I'll see you on Tuesday morning at 9:30. That'll be the next time we'll be together for Chai There with Rabbi Leah, where we will be continuing our study of Pirkei Avot as we get closer and closer to Mount Sinai. That's on Tuesday. And then on Thursday, a special program on what the Jubilee is. That'll be at 9:30 Thursday morning. So we got lots of fabulous stuff coming up. I hope I'm not just talking into my computer. I hope there are people out there watching this, enjoying it, listening and learning. If you have any questions whatsoever, please, please call me, email me, text me, whatever you'd like to do. Let me know your questions. I'm happy to answer them. In the meantime, Shabbat Shalom. Go take a little Shabbos Shlufi. That's what I'm going to do. I will see you Tuesday morning. Lehitraot. Bye-bye.